All right, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is episode 381 for the week of March 30th. We are rounding the corner, closing out another month, headed into April, whether that means your brackets in NCAA are all busted up or that your taxes are all crunched up and trying to get done. We are glad to have you back listening to us here on the Enough to Keep Going podcast. I am your host, DBQ Hams. It has been a long week, but as Game Logic and I were just talking about before the show started, we've get a little bit of some new hardware news coming out this week. So with the much anticipated, probably overhyped Nintendo Direct regarding the Switch 2, we will definitely see what that news brings for next week. But this week, we've got plenty to talk about, whether it's the games we've been playing or the news of the week and the analysis of the games industry over the course of this week. And doing it with me, as always, Game Logic. Game Logic, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. We've got lots of meaty topics in news to cover tonight.
We do. So let's not delay and let's get started. All right, so as we do every week here on the Enough to Keep Going podcast, our first segment is around some of the big games that we've been playing or some where we've sunk a chunk of our time over the course of this week. Then we'll hit you up with some of the news that we have curated in terms of things that struck our fancy or that we thought were significant. And we'll round it out with anything else that we've been playing or want to mention in terms of games in our playlist. Since I have the mic, I'm going to start off with a new game that came out this week. I did not realize that. I knew it was coming out soon. I did not realize that it was coming out. It came out on the 24th, so just about a week ago. And this is Dark Deity 2. So Dark Deity is a strategy RPG. Dark Deity is made by Sword and Axe, is the development team. The original Dark Deity came out probably a good couple of years ago at this point. It was originally kickstarted. It is a modern interpretation or a throwback to kind of the Game Boy Advance genre era of Fire Emblem. So the genre is a strategy RPG. You are definitely kind of moving around on your grid. You head into battles and you have a variety of character classes that all have the production value is really good. Actually, it's very kind of anime in its artwork in terms of kind of the character portraits. The sprite work is really kind of nice, but then it's all voice acted as well. So the first both the first Dark Deity and this one, you've kind of in this fantasy Middle Ages type of story, which gives you lots of tropes in terms of knights and elves and archers and magic and a variety of different character classes that you can be. And this is and you have kind of named characters. The way that it sets it up in terms of the story is it's interesting. I'm enjoying I'm only a couple chapters in, enjoying the story. It's not anything kind of revolutionary, but what is really engaging is the combat in terms of that kind of chessboard like strategy RPG in a traditional kind of Fire Emblem sense. And one of the things that it does is it has a variety of difficulty settings in terms of kind of an easy mode, but it also has you have a limited number of turns or an endless number of turns, and it's designed to be played as a limited number of turns. So each battle you go into has a turn limit and certain conditions for you to win the battle. And it's not always defeating all the enemies. Sometimes it's escaping alive. Sometimes it's recovering a certain item. Sometimes it's defeating a certain enemy with only making sure that certain characters stay alive. It does not have permadeath in terms of, the kind of traditional Fire Emblem hardcore aspect to it, that your character can die and be out of the battle, but is not, lost to your party and squad for the rest of the game. So that makes it a little more forgiving there. But if you've ever played a 3DS or a DS or GBA type of Fire Emblem, you kind of know what you're getting into. One of the things that I've played the original, have it both on PC and on Switch, and the original has a little more, I don't know, necessarily RNG, or there's a little more uh, chance in terms of some of your battles, where this game goes back to kind of the traditional setting where it gives you the opponent's defense and your attack, and the difference is the amount of damage. And so it has a lot. It streamlines some of those pieces. It also does some things in terms of, it's not quite like an affinity. I have to, excuse me here. Whew, spring allergies. Thank you very much. No, but it's not quite an affinity, but you do have that. As you're stacking up your units, right? Like, you're kind of, if you have a support unit next to a damage dealer, or a range unit next to a kind of shield unit, you'll get certain buffs as they kind of stack up together on the grid. So it is mirroring a lot of those kind of traditional Fire Emblem strategy RPG aspects. And so if that's a type of genre that you've enjoyed, this game isn't doing anything drastically different. It is very accessible, kind of user friendly in terms of some of its difficulty settings in terms of getting you into the game, but it's a really fun strategy RPG. I'm enjoying it. I really enjoy the characterizations. It's all voice acted, which is actually pretty impressive for a little indie game. The full price of this is $25 on Steam. It just launched on Steam. Right now it's on sale for $19.99 until the middle of April. If you own the original Dark Deity, you even get a little further discount. So I think I paid $18 total for this game, and it's running great on my Steam Deck, is where I've really been playing it. And it's a nice kind of curl up in a couch, curl up in a chair, and play some strategy games. So that's Dark Deity 2. Game Logic, you have played some of the older Fire Emblems, or was Fire Emblem Three Houses your first kind of foray into? I mean, you've played XComs and some other strategy RPG types of strategy games. Is this something that sits somewhere in on your radar, or is this a genre that has never really clicked for you?
Well, you're saying strategy or RPG in that kind of, in my mind, makes it. Well, I guess I don't really know of any really strategic RPGs. I think of this more as a tactical RPG, and so
I guess I would say, yep, a tactical RPG is a good way to throw it into that genre. Yep, more so than like a strategy of like a Unicorn Overlord, where you're kind of building your strategy is set up before you get to the battle. This is very much kind of tactical in terms of that chessboard like movement.
Yeah, Unicorn Overlord definitely kind of elevates the tactical meat of the game, right, into kind of the theater level, right, as you're kind of worried about how you're like managing resources around the entire map as far as troop movements and stuff. So yeah, I mean, this type of game is definitely my bailiwick. I mean, I love the Fire Emblem games. I loved way back in the day Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yep.
And
yep.
Yeah, and Fallout Tactics, which I think I've heard we're getting remakes of both of those here at some point. So yeah, I mean, definitely a thing that would normally be on my radar. I had not been tracking Dark Deity at all. So, and right now, just my queue is kind of full. And we are, as we'll talk throughout the show, and we're about to turn the corner into April, which is just really kind of bonga, right, as far as games coming down the pipeline. So I'm not sure if this is one that I'll get back around to.
No, and it's also one of those where it's easy enough to kind of set it on a shelf and look for a sale at some point in time, because it's not a live service game. There's not a season to kind of keep up with. It is kind of a complete package, and something where, if you're taking a trip, you're looking for something on the Steam Deck, it certainly fits that bill. I would assume that this will come to Switch at some point as well as the original did. I don't know if the originals came also to PlayStation and Xbox. I'd have to look that up. But yeah, it's a nice kind of, it's easy to consume in kind of, as we talked about last week, and as we'll talk later today, it's a nice palate cleanse from a giant open world in Assassin's Creed. It's very self-contained. It is very confined within the grid of the map that you are battling into, and it's easy to play a board, to play a battle, and set it down and pick it back up. So it is not necessarily something. It's also something where I have found myself being like, oh, I could just do one more, right? In that true kind of civilization strategy aspect of like, yeah, okay, now, let's keep going. So it's enjoyable. The game go ahead.
Now, are you playing on both PC and Steam Deck, you said?
I'm just playing on Steam Deck. Yeah. Haven't tried it on PC, which I'm assuming it would run just fine. It does. So I can't speak to kind of keyboard support in terms of how it plays on a keyboard. It works. It's it's verified for the Steam Deck. Works great there in terms of that, and it has controller support if you're playing on PC as well.
So I think a recurring theme tonight is going to be a lot about quality of life, and so playing on Steam Deck is a really good litmus test for how well the quality of life implementation has been in a particular game. And I think what I heard you mention was there's nothing really that's really haranguing you or kind of tackling you at the shoestrings as far as quality of life aspects and ease of play.
No. Well, and again, this is kind of 1632-bit pixel art. So it's not really pushing hard on the technical limitations of the Steam Deck. It is, the grid is very much in that kind of pixel art mode. And then as you go into a battle, just like the old Fire Emblems where it jumps into a enemy versus enemy screen, or, opponent and your character to carry out the action, which you can fast forward through. Yeah, it is in some way, I am not, the voice acting and the music is not being drowned out by my fan on the Steam Deck. So it's optimized nicely, and it's a smaller scoped game to allow that to be possible as well. But your game is not so small in scope, and that's Kingdom Come Deliverance 2.
Yeah, it is not, as I've put like close to 6 hours into the game and feel like I have only moved the story, but a small bit on the needle. And so I'll start off here. We've talked about, like, this is not the first time I've talked about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 on the show. So I'll start off here with tonight's tirade about quality of life. I will, once again, as I've probably done thousands of times since we've been podcasting, if you go all the way back through the history of the show and through the DNA and genealogical chain and get all the way back to like 2008, as I probably said over the last 16 years, there is absolutely no excuse in my mind, and there is no design imperative or mandate for a game on PC, unless you are a roguelike, for you to not have a save anywhere functionality. Like, nothing about not having that increases my feeling of challenge or much less fun. It always comes across as a pain in my butt and a reason why I dislike playing a game. The save methodologies in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, you can save three ways. You can either actually mix a potion that acts like basically it's a consumable, and so as long as you have it, as long as you have that in your inventory, that provides you save anywhere functionality. If you don't have a potion of that type, which you have to learn the recipe for, and then you actually have to create it, and this game actually has a mechanic for you actually mixing potions, which you have to, which is a mini game, right? You actually have to remember, you have to find the right ingredients.
Can you mix potions anywhere, or do you have to be in certain locations to be able to mix potions?
You would have to be at an alchemy table.
Okay. So there are limitations in terms of when you can, pull that back up in order to have the save anywhere function.
Yeah, as far as I understand, as far as what I've been exposed to in the game. Then the other two ways of saving are you can sleep, and then whenever you sleep, you get a game save, and then you can save and quit. And when you save and quit, that, as far as I understand, the documentation and like the posting online, I've seen different things, because when a lot of times when you go to look this up, you find entries about Kingdom Come Deliverance, not Deliverance 2. And I think in Deliverance, the documentation said that save was deleted anytime you started the game again.
So it functions like a quick save that overwrites or isn't held onto.
Yes, and so as far as I understand it, overwrites based on the last checkpoint. So I guess theoretically, you could save and quit, because they actually tell you don't do this before a big battle. So I guess theoretically you could save and quit before a big battle, quit the game, restart the game, and you would be put back right just before that big battle. But if you died in that big battle, then your most recent saves next to that, I assume, would be some checkpoint save. And so you could theoretically lose a bunch of progress. So it's just so Byzantine and convoluted. Like I'm like, what? I'm like, why? Why? And of course, I had to figure all this out, because the game, at least as far as the point to which I played through it, the game hadn't explained these limitations to you. So I spent an hour today, because I got obsessed with when you get to a point in the game where fairly early where they take everything from you. That's part of the game's like introductory setup. So it's not like a Soldier of Fortune thing where you've played like 70% of the game and then they take away all your weapons and you wake up like in a prison, like you have to escape and start all over again. This is actually fairly early, and it's part of the setup of the main narrative of the campaign. And so you get everything taken away, and you're like put in stocks in like a town square. And when that scene ends, you kind of strike off on a new vector, I'll say. And you have nothing. Like, you have no clothes. Like, you have your 1700s, 1500, whatever the time period is, like underwear. And so you get a mix of missions that you have to accomplish, including, accomplishing some of the larger objectives of the campaign, which are to get invited to this wedding. But you also have to like find clothes, get a job, like some other more menial things. So, and I think it's like 3 different missions you're given. So I promptly struck out. So that's where I quit last time. And when I restarted today, I just picked like the first mission pip on my little compass, like the first one to the right, without consciously like thinking about it or choosing or whatever. And so that set me off in this direction to get to a mill where I could get a job, get a paying job. And then I found, came across some other things there. But at any rate, I struck out on this thing. I had completely zero regard for like distance, or, I wasn't trying to get to like the closest, mission spot or whatever.
So one of the things you're talking about is how it doesn't guide you or give you a lot of kind of tutorial aspects in this. Does it? It feels like it's kind of just tossing you out into this world, which if I remember right, the first one is very much kind of learn it as you go. Do you feel like you're guided, or you feel like you're kind of part of the gameplay experience is that discovery of your of kind of where your own story goes?
Yeah, and I definitely want to separate any notion of, criticism or praise of the game that I have for it being open world versus quality of life stuff, right? So my first negative against the game about like the way it goes around saves, that's a quality of life thing. The open world thing I'm completely fine with. I love it. And part of the reason why I did this is because this is the same thing I did in either Fallout 3 or Fallout 4. I can't remember whichever one it was, but whichever one where the setup is like your son goes missing or is kidnapped or something like that. And I remember in that game,
Fallout 4, I think.
Okay. I remember in that game, like hitting the first town with like the first major big combat thing where you have the armor or whatever. And I also remember like leaving that and it going open world and saying, you can do this, you can do that. And deciding I'm just going to walk entirely across the other side of the map where one of these key campaign objectives is, and thereby bypass all this mini mission cruft, like that's in between you and that space. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to go all the way over there. So on the way over there, I encountered two bandits who were accosting someone who I think owed them money. And in this encounter, they just killed him and looted him. And so this is at a point in the game, despite being several hours in, where I hadn't been presented a lot of certain mechanics. I had not been taught how to sneak up behind people. I hadn't been taught how to knock people out from behind. And I don't know if I had been entirely been taught how to loot. So again, I'm in this destitute state, right? I have no clothes on my back, like I have nothing. But I do know that I need to. I know through the mini missions, like, hey, I need to acquire clothes, weapons, armor, like the whole kit and caboodle. So I see these two guys, and I'm like, I think I can get the drop on these guys and take one out and loot that person and gain weapons and armor that way, and then hopefully I can dispatch the other one. Now, again, this is just in my mind, living in this world, deciding that this was something that I could do, having been taught nothing in terms of the game mechanics that told me that was even possible. So,
but I want to hear how the story goes, but in that moment, right? Like there's an immersion to that. Like that successful game design is that it's pulled you into this direction and is giving you either because of the way that the game is set up, or that you're bringing in previous experiences to make you think that you could accomplish that. Now, did you accomplish that?
After an hour of trying. And so part of the problem with some of the mechanics in the game, and again, this isn't I won't call this a negative, but it's just the experience people know. Sneaking up behind somebody and knocking them out. So you don't knock anybody out by just hitting them over the head. The way the mechanic works is you have to grab them, put them in a chokehold. That's the easy part. And so there's a Splinter Cell like little tiny like couple millimeters of space whereby you can do the grab them, put them in the chokehold mechanic. And if you miss that, they become aware of your presence, right? So I did that several times.
Sounds like a tight window. Yeah.
It is very tight. It is very tight. So I did that several times. But the other thing is while you're trying to pull this off, you're getting little flashes of, hey, here are the controls you need to hit in the lower right-hand corner of your HUD, when you're not looking at the lower right-hand corner, you're looking at the center of your screen. So these things are popping up. I'm trying to catch them right out of the corner of my eye. And there's several different, right? As we go through this one, there's some that you have to like push and hold. There's some that are timed. There's some that have like this little space. Like, so at any rate, I finally, after many times, right, figure out how to finally pull off grabbing them and putting them in this chokehold. Once they're in the chokehold, it's kind of a QTE, and you're looking for a little cross sword pip to come up on the screen surrounded by like a blue like background. And when that happens, then you have to hit it's the right trigger control, right? Which is normally what you use to hit people, I think. And so you have to pull that off. If you hit that right at the right time, you don't really have to hit it like on time with a QTE. You just, what the online recommendation is, you just spam it, right? So that you just happen to hit it at the right time. If you miss that, then what it winds up happening is then after that, you get a green shield pip with a blue background. And when that comes up, the person is reaching behind them to hit you with their elbow, right? If you block that, that's a super block, and you will immediately put them back in a chokehold and immediately knock them out. If you miss that, you wind up getting hit in the face with their elbow, and now they're free and you go into combat. So as I explain how complicated that is, you can imagine again that I did dozens and dozens and dozens of reps of this. This is all notwithstanding the fact that there's an environmental problem in this whole setup too. The hoods don't always like knock him out right and wind up positioned in the same angle. Sometimes the other guy is walking around, blah 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 blah. I tried to hit the, I tried to sneak up behind them. There's certain times when the person runs off into the woods, which is the best setup. And then one of them chases him and cuts him down, and the other one kind of trails behind him. That's like the optimal setup. But sometimes they kill him on the road, and then you're like within the visual arc of the person looting him. Like while you're trying to do this, there were times when it didn't work and the guy broke out of the hold. So I ran down the road, and further down the road, there is another guy coming on horseback who I think is like a marshal or something. And he actually tries to take out the hoods. And then I would try and come back and try and take them out and would get killed. So it's just dozens and dozens and dozens of reps. So finally I knocked the guy out. And actually I knocked him out quite a few times because there's more to this that I screwed up after. So when you knock him out, by that time, the other guy becomes aware of you. And when they're fighting you and they're armed, like the other guy's armed with a sword or an axe, and you're not, you get hit maybe 2 or 3 times, right? And you're gone. And the only way you can survive that is to run away. So now I've got the one guy knocked out. I don't have time to loot his body. The other guy is trying to hack at me. And so basically what I have to do is I have to run this escape route that where I loop back and try and get back. So I like run into the forest, evade him for a while, loop back to the road, get there in time to loot the body. To loot the body, you have to hit A to bring up the loot UI, and then you have to hit A and hold it to do take all.
So this is taking time where the other people could still come and see you or
where he eventually catches you because he never loses track of you. So this is another part though that I had to do like multiple times because again, these are controls that are popping up at the lower right hand part of the screen, right? So I was trying to watch these controls. I had to watch a couple YouTube videos because the whole like chokehold mechanic thing like wasn't making sense. So eventually I pull this off. I run away. This is also the point where I run away because the whole time I'm thinking, I'm like, oh man, once I get some weapons, I'm going to turn around and light this guy up. So I ran away. I finally got to a point where I could go into my inventory and put all this stuff on. That's when I go to the save screen and save is grayed out. So I'm like, I'm not going to.
Oh no! After all of that, and
yes. So I'm like, I'm not going to turn around and fight this guy when I can't do can't do a scum save, basically, right? And have to do all that over again. So that's when I realized that saving was limited, right? Because I had already used the saving potion before. So at that point, I just ran, like I just detached from the situation. I got to the next town. The guy stops chasing you. At that point, I was like, okay, let me just go ahead and go all the way over to this other side of the map, to this mill that I'm trying to go to. And so that was like the first hour of my gameplay this afternoon, which as that story now sits in my mind and I remove all of the times that I had to do it, like 30 something times to finally get it right. Actually a very immersive sequence.
Sure. Right. Like if you can
player providence,
stomach it and not get too frustrated, like there's the timing of all that is actually semi-realistic in terms of it's not just an Assassin's Creed quick run past and push the Y button to grab it type of thing.
Very true. Very true. So like I said, that was about an hour. I finally got past that, got to the mill. I had to do another lookup to see like the job you get is like moving. You're one of several hired hands, and their whole job is to move sacks of flour once they are ground in the mill and move them to a wagon, right, for further transport to the city or whatever. There are a couple other like mini missions that you get exposed to there. It was nice to find out that the sleep to save mechanic is not. I assumed it was gated by time, and like you would have to do something like sleep a full day, but it's not. You can take a 1 hour nap, and that gives you a game save. So,
and there's no limitation on that. You could do it at any point. You just have to not be in combat.
There's I would assume that there's other things that would break combat before because like you have to get into a house and get to your bed and blah 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 blah. There does seem to be a limitation to it. I'm not sure if it's driven by like have you actually done anything or if there's like a limit to how much you can sleep in a period of time. But if you try and sleep like excessively, it will say, yeah, you can't sleep. I can't remember if it still lets you save, but it seems when that trips, it seems to be non-impactful. Like I think the way the mechanic is you couldn't like sleep, go out and do something productive that you would want to save, and then get back and be told, hey, you slept too much or something for the day. Like I think there's some other trigger around when it prevents you from repetitiously sleeping. But yeah, I'm continuing to work away at it. It has very kind of clunky physics to it. It very much feels kind of like a Skyrim, Oblivion, that kind of, not very fluid.
A little bit of open world jank in it type of thing.
Yeah, but
just the clunkiness of it.
Yes, in terms of the combat and the kinematics. But when you're going through the world, it is. I think this is a UE5 game. But when you're going through the world, I mean, there are points where it looks, fairly beautiful, right, in terms of like all the vegetation and stuff that it has in the background. It's not an ugly game. It may not have the full spit and polish of some higher production value games, but it still looks very good, right, for the kind of small development team that worked on it. So I'm having fun with it. I'm hoping that once I clear some of these hurdles of learning curve, that these are things that it gets easier from here on out, and but yeah, there are also some things in contrast to what we've talked about over the last few weeks with like Avowed and Assassin's Creed Shadows, how there's just a lot of those quality of life things that they don't put in your face, right? That may give you a bigger administrative and logistics burden, right? And just like let you play the game. This is not a game that's just about, hey, just let me play the game. So once you kind of admit to that, it probably gets a little easier to consume. But yeah, that's where I am with it right now. I
think it says something though, that you're not bouncing off of it, right? Like you've had these struggles, you've pushed against this friction, but you're seeing, there's some gratification in that as well as you kind of overcome some of those parts. So I think that says a lot about the potential for the game. Did you play the original, or how far did you spend with the original?
I did. And
okay.
And I'm not bouncing off of it now, but like it was a struggle to get on the horse with it today, right? Because some of the other games that I've been playing, Assassin's Creed Avowed is still out there, and I'm just like, am I going to put 4 hours into this today? Or, geez, it seems like I would get a heck of a lot more of 4 hours out of, those other games. So
yes, when 2 of those hours could be fighting the same battle and circling around again.
Yep.
All right. Well, speaking of fighting the same battle, let's head into our news stories of the week. Game Logic, you are up first with a little bit of not necessarily a surprise, but definitely a statement coming from the NetFlix games.
Yeah, so this news story over on Eurogamer by Matt Wales. Netflix games boss says consoles not the future as streamer looks to phone-controlled party games. After Netflix's tentative first few years in games, which has seen it grow its mobile library, acquire studios, and dabble in AAA development before dramatically changing course, the streamer's new gaming boss, Elaine Taskin, has laid out the company's latest vision. This, he says, is less about the console model and more about phone-controlled party games. Taskin, a 30-year industry veteran who most recently served as executive vice president of game development at Epic Games, joined Netflix last July, taking over the role from Mike Verdu, who briefly transitioned to vice president of generative AI at Netflix before departing the company. And with 9 months at the streaming service now under his belt, Taskin recently outlined his vision for Netflix gaming at this year's GDC. Probably the main quote in here is... I thought I had it. Maybe it's not in this news article, but at any rate, there's a popular quote that's out running around that is mostly about his feeling that the example he uses is that 8 and 10-year-olds aren't interested in consoles, or that he's unsure. Oh yeah, look at the younger generation. Are 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds dreaming of owning a PlayStation 6? I'm not sure. They're wanting to interact with any digital screen, whatever it is, even in the car. With console, you're thinking about high definition, you're thinking about the controller. If we look at this older model, I think it will restrain us. So, DBQ, I'll start with to kind of ask your opinions on that position.
I actually don't take a whole lot of issue with it. I think in some ways, I mean, but I'm also the one that has been banging the drum of AAA high-end development is increasingly riskier and riskier and is becoming more risk adverse. So I think for a studio and a platform that is built on streaming and knows where its users are engaging with it and how many of those are on a mobile device or a tablet versus a TV screen, I think it makes a lot of sense for Netflix to think about this in terms of mobile development more so than trying to go after and capture bigger studios to become, you know, like they've done with movies and TV as they're nominated for Emmys and Oscars. Like they are in that big studio model to some degree, but here it definitely feels like they're taking a step back in the game space and staying within things that are probably quicker, easier to develop. I think one of the other quotes in here that I pulled out is further down toward the end in terms of just scratching the surface, right? The Squid Game, you watch the show, you can unlock some currency in the game, right? They have having an integrated platform between streaming video content and games potentially allows them to have a lot of crossover in spaces that are unique to them, that AAA development or console development doesn't necessarily have that functionality. Now, I find that quote very interesting because just last week we had, another news story out of Netflix games that they've canceled many of their kind of story-based visual novel games around their dating series and a variety of other kind of series within the platform. So I can understand where this is at. I also still am not sure what Netflix games is going to be because they have divested themselves from a lot of their kind of ramp up that they had done over the last 5 years.
Yeah, well, I disagree with his philosophical take 9 ways to Sunday. So look, like their strategy is to be dubious at best, but I will concur that it's probably the best thing for them. There are some weirdisms to it, like banking on the uptake of gaming concurrency with their video content because there are lots of people viewing their video content on phones and tablets is an interesting notion when they are deliberately taking action that drives people to TV screens, which means, by which I mean going after people for concurrent usage of Netflix
Your
subscription.
simultaneous. Yep.
Yeah, like you're kicking the people off who are on the tablets and phones because those are your demographics who can't afford the subscription. So they're leaning on their parents who are watching it on TV. And when you drive those people to have to get their own subscription, I question whether or not they're still going to just be watching it on their phones and tablets.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
The other thing I will say is watching video content on a phone is not a good experience, right? You do it, and this is the same thing with games, and this is why I disagree with the philosophical take. There are things that people do on phones because they have them and because they're available. There are things that people do on phones because they allow them access to things when there's idle time. I listen to a ton of podcasts now that I have AirPods because I can access that content when I'm washing dishes and when I have like 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. But what I won't do is engage on my phone with deep, rich content that actually is of high value and that people will pay higher prices for. And so what type of content is valuable to put on a phone or a tablet where people are looking to engage with very limited time? it's just, I mean, there's a bajillion different ways where that philosophy falls apart. I also think that this whole notion that our 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds dreaming of a PlayStation 6. Kids tend not to dream about things that they haven't been exposed to. And so like, and once they do get exposed to them or they do become aware of them, they aspire to them. When I was a young male adult, I hadn't been exposed to scuba diving and backpacking. But once I got to an age where, because my parents didn't expose me to those things, kids whose parents do expose them to those things are interested in them. But the other token is that then as I grew older and I became aware of those things, and accessing those things became a matter of me using my own disposable income and me making choices in my life that were not gated by parents, I then became interested in those things. So the question I ask about the whole 8-year-old and 10-year-old thing is, okay, so that 8-year-old who has been given an Amazon Kindle Fire, who isn't dreaming about a PlayStation 6, let's fast forward that kid to when they're 16 years old and they're mowing lawns. Are they mowing lawns and then taking that money so that they can go out and buy an iPad to play games? I highly doubt it. Typically, as we move up the food chain, we tend to aspire to more prestigious methods of consuming entertainment. Then again, I go back to the whole notion of the attention-based economy, phones, and tablets. And the other thing that I would say is worrisome is people who are consuming content on those devices, they're consuming content on those devices because of their convenience. But I would also say they're not, when you then talk about trying to push into gaming, they're not consuming content from those devices as primary gaming devices. They are consuming dozens of different types of content. They're consuming video. They're consuming, I would say, paid video. They're consuming free video on YouTube. They are watching Twitch. They are watching live streamers. They are maybe playing a few games that are very casual, and I'll come back to that in a second. They are reading. They are reading comic books. They are heavily engaged on social media. They're watching TikTok. So now here becomes the problem. You're saying that that your theory is that that's where people are on their tablets and their phones, and you're going to push into gaming. But the attention of those consumers on those phones is sprayed out in 270 different degrees of direction, further limiting the opportunity and availability of where your gaming content is going to be consumed. But you're not going to make prestige content for them to grab that attention away. You're going to try and get them into Candy Crush retro football, right? Look at NBA 2K on tablet or Call of Duty Warzone on tablet. That's higher prestige type of content, but that's a risky play. Are people gonna spend the time? The NBA 2K thing is very interesting because I play NBA 2K on tablet. I've played it on a Mac Mini. I played it other places. It's a controller-based game, which this guy says, right, becomes limiting and constraining. But when I play that content and I go, wow, this is like a suitable substitute for replaying NBA 2K on a PlayStation, right? But unless you achieve quality parity, it's a risky play. So I just think like I said, there's 9 different ways to Sunday that I feel like this whole thing falls apart. I don't believe kids are only going to remain interested in content via the delivery mechanism that they have access to today. Otherwise, you and I would still be playing on Split Second. We'd still be playing the little blip NFL football made by Mattel.
Those red LCDs, come on, yeah. Right, but I think, I mean, I hear your point and I agree with it in terms of it's a narrow view of the market. It to me feels like it is investor speak to some degree, right? We are positioning this because this is our play, and so we need to make it sound good for investors. But I do agree with you that is not, and I think the numbers play out, right? You don't have 100+ million people with Switches. You don't have, PlayStation 5 is inching at that number as well. Like the market has demonstrated that there is an interest and a demand for consoles, for dedicated systems, for higher end video games. But I think Netflix is not in a position where they can invest in that way, the same way that they did with TV and movies.
Right. And the last thing I'll mention is just before we move on is as you mentioned, I think this is heavily corporate speak, right? It is heavily because this is the same company that years ago said this is an attention based economy and our biggest competitor is not other video streaming services, it's Fortnite. And where does Fortnite get played? Ranked 1 through 4, Fortnite gets played on PlayStation and then on Xbox and then on PC and on mobile last, right? Part of the reason being because Google and Apple aren't going to let people play Fortnite, right? So, but my big thing is the Netflix strategy. The other problem with the way they're kind of articulating it as this is where the new generations will prefer to play is this has been tried before, and this has been tried at generational evolutionary inflection points where everybody screamed, well, everything's going mobile, right? Or everything's going in different ways. Like this is, I mean, we've been trying this as long as we've been putting games on hotel televisions, right? Like, does anybody play
that's
those
a
things?
Callback. Wow, nice. Yes, with like the GameCube controller or the N64 controller attached to it.
Well, the sad thing is it's a callback, but it's still there. Like, amazingly enough, despite the fact that everybody goes to hotels, I would, contend with their phones and with their tablets, that game channel or its service is still on hotel room TVs, and somebody's still making it, and hotels are still buying it. Like, I don't get it. But YouTube has tried this. Other streaming services have tried to put games somewhere on the UI and somewhere at eye level in to make it attractive to people, and people aren't consuming it. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Well, so let's talk about as we were talking about movies and TV and actors. Let's talk about SAG-AFTRA. You've got a new story here in terms of which I think I'm really excited and interested to see what comes out of this new story. So this is also one coming out of Eurogamer.
Yes, also from Eurogamer by Vicky Blake. SAG, after firms up support for student devs and game jam participants, SAG-AFTRA, the union that represents 160,000 American media professionals, including voiceover artists, has launched 2 new agreements: the Student Interactive Waiver Agreement and the Game Jam Waiver Agreement. The union said the new agreements provide video game developers at every stage of their careers the opportunity to work with union partners, even as the video game strike continues. So, I mean, this is a plus, right? I mean, it's super interesting and impressive to me that, as the quote mentions, and as Vicky wrote into the article, that as SAG-AFTRA is engaged in this fight to the death, right, with the industry over AI and large language models and the use of performances, right, that have been contracted for but not necessarily paid for in the where the monetary vehicle hasn't really caught up to the evolution of the technology. The fact that SAG-AFTRA just quite frankly has enough gray matter, right, to put cycles on considering these, and both of these moves are very much about protecting future generations, right? Which is impressive. I mean, I don't want to quote it as a negative, but it could be argued that maybe they weren't as fast to the fight as maybe they could have been with AI. And I don't find fault with them for that. AI moved incredibly fast and overnight became, both a lucrative play, but also a threat, and evolved in ways that I don't think any of us kind of imagined. But this is clearly a play of, look, we weren't first to the fight against AI. Here are these young developers and kids coming up behind us. Let's start thinking about where this stuff is going and how we lay protections down for them ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think it provides, I think the AI piece there is exactly one of the ways that I read into this as well, of it gives young developers the the ability to have those interactions with voice actors and figure out how that works and build some relationships potentially, or also have some good resume building. But at the same time, it gets them using and turning to voice actors rather than feeling kind of priced out of that market and turning to AI as a cheap alternative in their own kind of development practices as they're working on their degrees and their certificates. Because then if that's what they've learned as they've gone through programs, it's also where they're going to lean on as they start developing. And so it's starting to create a pipeline, I think, in some ways. And so it makes a lot of sense. All right, let's move on. Speaking of, I was going to say a pipeline, but I don't know that that's a great transition. So we had a Nintendo Direct this week with a number of Switch games, some remakes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on news there, but the one piece of news that I am calling out here is the virtual game card. So the idea of game sharing through people in your family network. So this is an article. It's covered in a variety of places. I pulled the one off of IGN, Michael Creep, and it talks about kind of the way that this system is going to work. That you have the ability. So these are, if you have a digital purchase, a game that's a digital purchase, and what we don't know so far yet is that if these are only Nintendo first party games, if these are anything that's going to be on the system has this ability, I would think that would be difficult with licensing and other publishers. But the way that it works for Nintendo games is that you could select a game and basically send it to another family member's library, as Game Logic just grabs the video here as well if you're watching. But if you haven't, basically if you have multiple Switches, whether you have Switches in your family, or I think the reason that this comes out the week before the Switch 2 announcement is that this is designed to say, hey, if you next week when we start thinking about a Switch 2 and we want you to buy one, here is how you can play those digital games on your Switch 2. Here's how you can start sharing those games. That this is not locked to a single device or even to a single Nintendo account, that you have that ability to then loan it out. And it's such a Nintendo way to do this, is that you are loaning it out from for at the most 14 days, that it's a 2-week loan and then it automatically gets returned. Like if you've ever checked out a digital audiobook or digital book from your public library, that it is very much in that same way, that it will automatically return it for you once you've hit your due date. And so this is how Nintendo is positioning its digital game sales in order to be able to kind of share within a family network. And so it's not as streamlined, as straightforward as things like Steam family sharing and other things have done. The fact that it has to be called a virtual game card and have a little automation to it feels very Nintendo-y. But the fact that they're thinking about this speaks a lot about how far into the reality of digital game sales and the market share that those have, that this is where Nintendo is putting some development resources.
Do you think that this is a precursor? So there's going to be some type of mid-gen refresh with this thing. Do you think that this is a precursor to the Nintendo Switch lineage going digital only?
I don't know that it's a precursor to that, because of the fact that it really is only, there's still ways around that if you have multiple accounts on a system, but those games you have to be connected to the internet. This doesn't need connection to the internet, but it only limits, one game per person at a time. And so I could see that this is a rationale for why it is feasible to have a mid-gen refresh that is a digital-only Switch, because it has this possibility. But I think one of the things that I would want to see to really make that the case is that if you have another Switch that has a cartridge, a physical cartridge, and you put it in, that it creates a virtual game card that then you could then lend in a family setting. And then I feel like it would be a setup for a justification for a digital only Switch, where here, at least at this point, the way I read it, it is only for games that you have purchased digitally, not necessarily a card that you're putting in and creating a digital equivalent of. But that seems very possible. I mean, that's, Microsoft's discs don't really do a whole lot in an Xbox. It is just a verification that you own that and can have digital rights to it. So it seems very possible that they could move in that direction. Is that where you're kind of thinking this lines up in terms of setting the table for a continued further movement down that digital only direction?
Yeah, I mean, my suspicion, there's lots of stuff oriented around this topic, but I do think that there's a plan to, whether it's the Switch after this or whether or not they even accelerate it to the mid-gen refresh, or even if they just make it just a SKU that becomes available at some point during this life cycle, I suspect that virtual cards is soon to be the only type of game cards there are.
Yeah, I could see them doing 2 SKUs for sure within a mid-series. So let's stay on some Nintendo news, and Game Logic, you got one from VG247.
Yeah, and one thing I want to backtrack on, so it's not entirely clear to me. I mean, you were saying internet access isn't required, but as far as I understand it, the Switches do have to be on the same Wi-Fi network.
So to transfer the game, I believe you do need to be in local connection with that. But then once you've launched the game once on a Wi-Fi, you don't need to launch it again, or on internet connection. You can be offline where.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Right now, as you know, with multiple family systems, like if you have a primary and a secondary Switch, that secondary Switch can only play games, digital games, if they're connected to the internet to be able to verify that you have that. So here's a way to say you're going on a family vacation and you're throwing a game on a kid's Switch or a sibling Switch. You don't have to be connected to an internet to be able to play that on the trip.
Which is a prudent mechanism, right? Because, you're not always guaranteed that families are going to be on reliable Wi-Fi. Right when they go, they may be going off to like stay at Shenandoah, right, in a cabin or something. So, yeah, no, that's good. I'm sorry, you were saying we were moving on to.
Yeah,
something.
Just moving on to we've got, no, right. I think there's, ideally, we don't know. This is supposed to come later in April, so we'll get more details as this actually launches in terms of how this actually plays out. But I think it was probably the only really kind of surprising piece that came out of that Nintendo Switch Direct, which is, not just kind of game filler, but here's something different that Nintendo is moving in. And I think as you said, it very much is setting the table, laying the foundation for future digital only designs. So
yeah, and I think at the outset, this is also partially a quality of life thing, right? So that when you set up your Nintendo Switch 2, instead of having to spend hours like downloading like your entire library, right, you're just going to take this thing, fling your virtual cards right over to the new Switch 2. And yeah, really, you're still going to have to download them at some point, but at least then you have essentially a library manifest right on your Nintendo Switch 2, precluding you from having to go through that janky mechanic of logging into the eShop, doing a search for the title, going down to like your downloads, or scrolling through like every single thing that you've ever purchased and download, right, and individually tagging them. So I think this will be pretty efficient.
Be a pretty lengthy process. Yep.
Yeah, at least to get you started.
All right, so now we're talking about games. So your next news story talks about the difference or the potential between Switch and Switch 2 games.
Yeah, so this is really, I just kind of laid this as a gateway drug to a wider conversation. But we'll start here. This news story over on VG247 by Mark Warren. What's the difference between Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games and Nintendo Switch 2 edition games? And he says all will be revealed next week. What's a Nintendo Switch 2 edition game, and how does it differ from the console exclusives? It seems to be separate. Seems to be a separate thing too. That's a question folks have been left contemplating after stumbling across a bit of small print Nintendo's put out there. And the console maker says you'll get the answer next week. Would that be the week that happens to feature a certain Switch 2 Direct? Yes, it is. The bit of fine print that's alerted everyone to Switch 2 edition games existing came attached to the...
On your commute. So where we like to find...
Sorry.
We don't want that.
Okay. The volume was overlaying the pause key. Games existing...
Autoplay videos. Oh.
Came attached to the virtual game card system Ninty revealed at yesterday's original Switch Focus Direct. There's more than that here. Naturally, after telling us that feature was coming, Nintendo put a webpage live that offers more info about how it works. So the point of this is that we now have verbiage that's in the wind that establishes at least a textual hint at a differentiation between a thing called Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games and Nintendo Switch 2 edition games. And so I guess at a minimum, these are new games that come out that only play on the Nintendo Switch 2 and don't play on the Nintendo Switch. But then there are Nintendo Switch 2 edition games, which seems to be alluding to titles that already exist for which there are multiple editions of the game, both a Switch edition and a Nintendo 2 edition. I think as we get into the gateway of this wider conversation, DBQ, one of the multiple questions to predict about what we're going to see in the Switch 2 Direct is there are Nintendo Switch 2 edition games. Those are games that get some type of buff or upgrade to however they played on Nintendo Switch. Do you think we are getting all of those at the Direct? Do you think when the Nintendo Switch 2 launches, you're going to be able to take every game in your Nintendo Switch library and either convert it to or play it as a Nintendo Switch 2 edition game?
Oh, I'm glad I was on mute because you had me laughing so hard. Like, what company are you talking about? That is not how Nintendo does things, right? This is the company that's going to drip feed you 3-generation old games on Wii Virtual Console or on their Nintendo Online just because they think it creates a zeitgeist around it, right? It becomes appointment or it is not flooding the market. No, I think we will get a series of games that are already that will launch on day one with enhancements. But I think that those enhancements, I would think similar to, what we've seen on both other consoles that we've seen, it takes time to do some of these enhancements. And so they will target some of the bigger sales, some of the newer games, things that probably have kind of existing bases or that they can get some play out of. When Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition launched earlier this month, there was kind of data mined a 60 frames version that is already on the console, or at least there's a acknowledgement of it, which means the way people read that was a Switch 2 enhancement. So I would think the language of this also kind of reminds me of the way that PlayStation does it, where you have on the PlayStation 5, when you want to download a game, you choose between, do you want the PlayStation 5 edition or the PlayStation 4 edition? And sometimes we've seen things like Metaphor ReFantazio, where initially the PlayStation 4 edition ran better and more stable on the PlayStation 5 than the PlayStation 5 edition did, just in terms of graphical enhancements and frame rate stability. But I think that that's how, like, when you going back to the messiness that is the eShop, that when you look for a game, you'll see potentially, in your game library, you'll have the ability to download one or the other. And it may be the fact that you only see that if you're on a Switch 2, because a Switch 2 could potentially run both versions, where on a Switch 1, you're only going to see the Switch edition of it rather than both. But that's kind of how I'm reading it. But again, that's me making sense of it within the existing video game landscape and not putting a Nintendo lens on it, which means it could mean anything and not necessarily be even clearly logical once they roll out some verbiage.
So now it's my turn to laugh. I'm not laughing with you, but I'm disagreeing with you, and not because I
good.
think you're wrong.
We've had lots of good back and forth here, playing devil's advocate to each other.
So as you mentioned that, right, that whole thing of like, there's a PlayStation 4 version, there's a PlayStation 5 version, there's an Xbox One version. While that may make sense, right, when you view it through a certain lens, do you also remember how horrific that experience that was?
Oh, especially once you were in like early on, right? Like the Xbox enhancements aspects of things. Yeah, that was not clear in those kind of cross-gen games.
Yeah, and this was in the time, which I'm sure people are already starting to forget about. This was also in the time where both the store and your console were not intelligent enough to tell you which one, right? This was when, like, the Call of Duty version for that year, like, if you picked the PlayStation 4 version, even if you were on a PlayStation 5, there was no smarts to tell you were doing the wrong thing.
Yes.
Now today, I mean, even though I've gotten rid of my consoles a few months ago, now today, like, if you're on PlayStation 5, it's gonna default to you pulling down the PlayStation 5 version, right? But it was not always that way. I spent many hours pulling down the incorrect version of a thing, deleting it, and then having to pull down the right version.
I'm pretty sure we spent significant airtime talking about some of those struggles that you had. Yep.
So, and then to think that Nintendo would put those smarts in the eShop.
Okay, now I get the joke. Okay, yep.
So here's my admittedly risky prediction. I actually think, because here's my thing too. Nintendo needs to sell a lot of Nintendo Switch 2s, and they need to sell a lot at the beginning of the generation and get everyone over. So as quickly as possible, they can get out of this. Will they, right now with Xbox, there's a will they, won't they every single time a title gets announced. Is that going to PlayStation 5? Right? I'm going to wait and I'm going to see. I think Nintendo wants to get past that as quickly as possible. I don't think they want the constant, is this going to be a title that's supported on the Switch? We see it's coming to Switch 2. Is there going to be a Switch version? I think, and I think they want to, as quickly as they possibly can, get their own studios to a point where those studios only have to do a Nintendo Switch 2 version. I don't think they want to see what they've seen with Xbox and PlayStation, where those studios have had to continue to support a last generation version past the midpoint, right, of the life cycle of this generation. So I think they want to give users big reasons to move and move quickly. So what I think is going to happen is, and I will admit this is a little wild, I think that these Nintendo Switch 2 edition games will be available at launch for the vast majority of your first party titles. And you'll be able to go and you'll be able to download them. I do agree it's not my own original idea, so I don't want to take on it. But I mean, I was thinking at the same time that the Kind of Funny Games guys did. I do think it will be linked to Nintendo Switch Online. And I think if you are a subscriber to that, you will have access to those versions. And if you're not a subscriber to that, kind of like the Mario track pack thing or whatever, you will be able to go and buy those, right, at some incremental individual price. If they don't do the full library, then I think what they will do is they will do it in big waves, and it will look like the way Xbox One Scorpio enhancements rolled out, where there will be buckets and bundles of games that come in at like 30 at a time or so that say, hey, the Nintendo Switch 2 editions of these games are available. Because again, I think they want to give people big reasons to move over, and I don't think they want those reasons to be dependent upon the pace in the release cadence of their first party studios. I don't think they want it to be based on when is the next Zelda coming out, when is the next Mario coming out, when is Mario Kart available at launch, are these things available at launch? I think they want to put a bigger stake on the bait hook about that on the front end.
I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense, right? Like that suddenly makes it so much more attractive for long-term switchover users to jump over sooner rather than later, right? Before the podcast, you asked me if the Switch 2 is something I'm, planning on purchasing early. And in part, like, if that would happen, like my drawer full of Switch games that all are suddenly going to run so much better, suddenly the value of that becomes a lot more convincing to say, yeah, I could be an early adopter versus waiting until there's some type of critical mass that my previous games are going to run better on. Like, so yeah, I think that kind of market logic makes a whole lot of sense. I think the other piece where I agree with you and see the roadmap there is for all of the delayed Switch 2 leaks and the acknowledgement and knowledge that this has been in development for a number of years, it's also provided even more time for developers to go back and do those passes to, have those assets ready to launch in those big drops that you're talking about.
The last thing that I'll mention, and I'll ask you your thoughts on this too. And this is, I'm going to kind of say it as a prediction, but I'm going to say it heavily leans on hope. Like, we know that Nintendo is going to bump these consoles with something, right? With the 3DS, they gave us a faster processor, which enhanced battery life. With the Nintendo Switch, they just gave us, it was a more efficient processor. It wasn't any faster, but it was more battery efficient.
Yeah, we got kind of iterative battery efficiency, and then the OLED, and I think that's the other kind of console refresh that they have accomplished this past generation.
Yeah. So we have this template. So my biggest wish for this generation is I don't want to see a carbon copy repeat of Nintendo Switch. Like, I don't want to see the Switch 2 launch and us get a new Zelda game at launch, right? Or even Metroid, and then Mario Kart the month after launch, and then Super Mario, right, this fall. Like, I don't want to see the same production pipeline repeated as a template. But I also don't necessarily want to see the same incremental rollout of the SKUs. So my prediction, which is also my prayer, I predict they're going to launch with 3 SKUs. I think they are going to have an OLED version at launch. I think they're going to have.
All right.
I think they're going to have an OLED version at launch. I think they're going to have an LCD version at launch, and I think they are going to have a light version at launch. Because to me, as I think about this, I'm like, it makes no sense for them to delay and stagger those things out in the life cycle of the generation. Like, you've got this virtual card thing. Yet again, you've just given people a new value prop to go out and do hardware refreshes. Because the thing I would want to do, as you mentioned, right, families going on trips, we're heading into the summer, we're heading into big vacation time, right? Let me get a Nintendo Switch 2 OLED for myself. Let me get 2 Nintendo Switch Lites for the younger kids. And if I got a teenager or a tweener, let me get that person the LCD. Now I've got this whole virtual card thing. I've got a bunch of games that have been refreshed and run at 60 frames per second, right? Now I'm going to fling all these virtual cards everywhere, set all this up before I go on my big vacation, right? And then all of us are going to have our Nintendo Switches on break.
Oh, game logic. I'm sorry you're going to be so disappointed. Like, if this is our yin and yang episode of who's playing devil's advocate, yeah, I would love that reality. I think we both can agree that the reality we're living in is less than ideal. So, yeah. I guess the reason I say that is historically Nintendo has seen their market and their users so willing to buy multiple Switches, multiple hardware at refresh spots. The Game Boy Advance, the SP, the Game Boy Color, Game Boy Pocket, right? Like, they know that they can double and triple dip if they stagger these out. And I think, as much as honestly, if there was a Switch 2 OLED, I'd be there right from the beginning. As much as that makes a whole lot of market sense, is that they've just put out this suite of systems. Even if they would do a light and a regular one, something that would provide some choice for people. I think that would make a lot of market sense for a number of other manufacturers and companies, but I would be shocked, and I will put money down on the opposite end of that prediction, is that it would shock me if Nintendo rolls out a family of systems right out of the gate rather than trying to milk their fan base and users for mid-gen incremental updates or side projects like the Switch Lite.
So another rationale for why I think they might go this way is because, number one, I feel like their ability to sell additional Switches further in the life cycle gets almost completely covered by collector's editions. Right? Every time they drop a new like legacy IP, and, all right, this is the Zelda version, right?
They could do that up and down. Yep, and we've seen that case as well. That's a good point.
But I think one of the big justifications for this is these things are going to be more expensive. And that sticker shock and giving people an ability to buy in early at different price points, I think plays right into that. But by the same token, giving the high-end customers the ability to buy in at the higher price point, I think buys revenue for them. Particularly if their margins are still good and they're not subsidizing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like if they can have a $500 Switch that is kind of what they've been showing, and they come out with they simultaneously launch with a Switch Lite, which is even at $350 or $300, which makes it more attractive, a Switch 2 Lite, more attractive to families who are heavily invested into this infrastructure. Yeah, I would love to be wrong. And the beauty of this show is in 3 days from now, we're going to know. And in 7 days from now, we're going to get to have this conversation. So yeah, I think this is the fun part of like what really happens, what makes business sense, but what also makes kind of Nintendo sense and market sense. So be interesting to see where we go with that.
Yeah, my last thing I'll mention is my price points are a little less than yours. I think I've been pitching Switch 2 OLED at $450, Switch 2 LCD at $400, at $399, $400, and the Switch 2 Lite is the one that I'm on the fence on. Like I feel like they could offer people a huge value prop by sticking with the $199, but they could easily do $250. I think $299 starts to feel a little like when you talk about somebody's buying a Nintendo Switch 2 Lite along with a big boy Nintendo Switch 2, that starts to be like, you talk about now, you're talking about like $1,000, to outfit a family with 3 of them. That gets a little on the edge for me, but we'll see. It'll be super interesting.
Yeah, it will be. I think that's if I had to put money down on a price point, I would agree with you on the LCD $400 $399 spot. I'd be very let's let April 2nd come. Let's get through all the bad internet jokes on April 1st and move off to hopefully a good Nintendo presentation on April 2nd. So this next news story, we're running long on news, as Game Logic said at the top of the show. We've got lots to cover, so we're going to hit some of these a little quick here. And in part, this next one around Ubisoft and Tencent, I don't have a lot to say about it because I feel like we don't know a whole lot about what this means. So this was kind of a surprise. It was a surprise, not a surprise, right? We knew that Ubisoft was struggling. We knew that it had been looking at trying to figure out its various different business models, that we knew that Assassin's Creed Shadow was kind of make or break to some degree in terms of really needing to come out and be a success, that they've been looking for other investors. And so here we get the announcement this week. News stories both from game developer, from Danielle Rendo, Riendo, and also at GameIndustry.biz with Vicky Blake. In terms of Ubisoft has announced a new subsidiary. So the way that they've talked about it is a transformation, and they are quote here, building game ecosystems designed to become truly evergreen and multi-platform. But I think the headline that and the place where I see a lot of focus here is that Ubisoft in this subsidiary is really going to focus on three franchises: on Assassin's Creed, on Far Cry, and on Rainbow Six. And I think this sets it up in such a way that this doesn't necessarily always mean big AAA games. This is not just a live game service, that this potentially brings in a variety of, as we were talking about earlier on the show about Netflix and their games. There's a Rainbow Six kind of tactical game on Netflix games. It's not realistic. It's a little cartoony, but it is still in that kind of, in that world and using that IP. So this is trying to focus on three big ones. What we don't know is, what does this mean for the rest of Ubisoft's game development, and how does this spin out in terms of resources? We have the kind of concurrent announcement here that there's a 1.25 or $1.25 billion investment from Tencent within this subsidiary, which is a minority stake. Some places I thought I saw that being a less than or 10% stake or so. But we just know that this is an announcement. I think the questions that I have is like, what does this mean going forward? What does this mean for Ubisoft trying something new and weird? Or does this mean that they are that becomes something that is fewer and far between, where much of their work is done within these big three? Are you reading anything else into this, Game Logic, or it feels like it could be substantial, but we don't know enough yet to know exactly what the outcomes of this will be?
Yeah, there's a ton to unpack here, and like you mentioned, we're running short on time. I think my three major bluff statements on this are: number one, Assassin's Creed Shadows was never going to save Ubisoft. It was never going to tip the scales. It was never going to pull them back from the maw. The point of Assassin's Creed Shadows and where the scales tip on its success or failure was always around how much strength did that give to the Guillermo brothers at any negotiating table. And that was it, right? Part two is that, right? This is much more so about how much control the Guillermo brothers maintain over whatever is left of a thing that we used to call, or will continue to call, or will stop calling Ubisoft. This is about these two brothers having quite literally dedicated chunks of the vast majority of their lives into this company, taking it from the thing that it started as a studio working out of a castle in France, to the multi-billion-dollar company that it is today, and them still maybe mistakenly holding on to the notion that it's still their baby and they provide some value, and their tenacious insistence to not be entirely deposed. And so there's that's going on.
I think that's a really important read on this, is that it is, by the nature of it, it really does kind of segment them out from whatever happens with Ubisoft proper.
Yeah, it's very personal for them, and I'm not saying that in a necessarily bad way. And then the third thing I will say is this whole thing with Tencent has been going on for a very long time. The big investment that Tencent made most recently that people probably remember was not an investment by Tencent, not this 1.25 billion, but the last big investment they made was not an investment in Ubisoft. It was an investment in the Guillermo brothers holding company that holds the shares of Ubisoft that is owned by the Guillermo brothers. And that is another way of by regulatory law distancing themselves from liability and not having all things can happen to that thing without directly impacting them, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how the whole ballet, works out. My prediction is, I can't remember. I think on another podcast I was on, that host asked this question, so I don't want to take credit for it. It may have been Slow-Mo and Forte on the Damage Per Second podcast, but I think Slow-Mo asked us the question: in 5 years, did we think we would still be calling Ubisoft? My prediction is in 5 years, what we know today as Ubisoft will no longer be. It will probably be at least 3 different companies. It may be 3 different companies by then, of which one has dissolved. And I think they'll be called something else. One might still be called Ubisoft, right? But might be called Ubisoft something, right? With a suffix tacked onto the end. The other one may still be Ubisoft, but may have also, I predict, will also have completely changed its name to just completely separate itself from what used to be known as Ubisoft.
Hero Down Under, thank you for chiming in. Yes, that was you've been here this whole time, and now is when you decide to jump in, Hero. No, I think that's the idea, as Hero points out here in the chat, that it will be a different entity. It will be something different. Yeah, I think it will be very interesting to see. I think this does set up the Guillermo brothers to be positioned to battle out whatever comes, or to fortify themselves against whatever is coming. And it really, I think within 3 years, we're going to have a very, I wouldn't even say 5. I would put it in the 3-year spot of what, especially with kind of the economics where they are. I think that we're going to see something. It will be very interesting to see what ends up happening. And then, as Hero points out, who owns all these IPs? How do they get divvied up? Do we get kind of a THQ mess of people buying them up? Or, in some ways, this goes back to why the subsidiary exists, is because now they have laid claim to these 3 IPs to hold on to no matter what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely looking at, right, at some point here in the near future, some of them being auctioned off and being set up for grabs, right, by other publishers, and then the ones that don't sell, will either be dissolved, or will just those studios will go away, and this Ubisoft Tencent thing that just got stood up will become the holder of those IPs, and they'll just maybe become a licensing shop to farm them out to anybody who comes by and wants to pay the fee to license them.
That works so well for Embracer, Go ahead. Sorry, I couldn't resist that.
and you mentioned the one last thing that I wanted to bring up, right? Because we all know that Game Logic loves a great case study in business. And yeah, these are the case the case studies we're looking at is, does this thing go the direction of THQ? Or does this thing, or the other historical case study that we have to kind of look at and lean on, that lots of people don't remember, is, remember the Activision Blizzard merger was not just Activision Blizzard, it was Activision Blizzard Vivendi Universal, who owned a significant stake, I think, in Activision. But at this merger, the way the shares moved around, Vivendi Universal became actually a larger controlling entity with a bigger stake, maybe than they'd had before when it was just them and Activision. There were lots of activist investor struggles back and forth between the two. Of course, Vivendi Universal was the larger corporate entity that was really behind what used to be known as Sierra Online, which way back in the day was a big deal, right? King's Quest, Space Quest, a lot of games in the Quest universe. And then not so much, right, as gaming progressed on. So, and in the break between Vivendi Universal and Activision wound up becoming a very contentious breakup. And so it's probably one of those two that we're kind of looking at, or something similar. And you mentioned Embracer, right, which is another good. I mean, that's fairly recent, so I don't lean on that as much as a case study, but. Do the properties that get separated from Ubisoft wind up? I mean, quite honestly, I don't dismiss that Embracer may possibly be one of the ones to pick up, right, those IPs, right, when they go up for auction, or Saber Interactive.
All right. Well, we'll definitely have more to talk about that as this continues to roll out. We've got, speaking of rollout, you got we got a couple quick hits here before we roll into our final segment. Game Logic, do you want to hit these real quick, or
I'm just going to mention them by title, just to make people aware. For Once Human, for people, I put this down in honor of Talmaster 99, since he's a big MMO survival type game person. NetEase's surreal co-op horror Once Human is tempting back lapsed players with these new features. They apparently have a mobile version that's rolling out next month, and so in preps for that, they are also trying to get people back on board. This is kind of a good news story in terms of tail of the tape. This is a black hole game, right? MMO game that rolled out to not super great user reviews on Steam, and in the time since it's been stood up, it has clawed back to a positive review state on Steam. So I consider it kind of one of the victory stories of games that, you know, start off not well, but then crawl back. And so hopefully, you know, good things coming up for them. The second Flashpoint story is it's almost time to hit the road again as American Truck Simulator. Missouri expansion gets a release date. I put this in for my own interest because I enjoy playing American Truck Simulator. I think it's a game that plays great on Steam Deck, and allows you to kind of go through the grind of you know, building up your fleet of trucks and like investing in getting your licenses and all that kind of stuff. And so they've got a new expansion coming out for Missouri. So for people interested in that, feel free to keep an eye out.
all right, let's roll out and Autobots. Let's roll out into our final segment here with our game rundown. Game Logic, you and I have both been playing some more Assassin's Creed Shadows. I don't know that I've been playing a little bit more, but mainly I've been running around and trying to figure out how to climb up a cliff and realizing that I should probably just get on my horse and follow the path rather than doing Cassandra and trying to climb up every cliff I can see. But I am just kind of, at this point, I haven't really progressed the story very much. I've done a bunch of the kind of memories, but I'm really just out in kind of roaming around phase at this point. So have you spent more time with it, or are you kind of, and also last week I haven't had a chance to hook it up and play it on 4K to see if I'm looking at anything different, but how's your time been with it?
Yeah, I've invested more time in it. I have progressed the story. I am probably not, I don't think I'm trying to mainline it. So I am progressing the story, but I am going about it casually, and I'm being willing to go off and do side mission stuff. I have, you know, done a couple of progressions right down the skill tree, and added some things on, and actually I'm actively like using those capabilities. Like one, now he has an ability to kind of throw a I can't remember what the things are called, but the throwing blades that she throws is something that starts with a K. She has the ability to kind of rapid fire those and throw those on the fly, where you can quickly hit the aim button and fire and not have to go into the whole, you know, let me aim, let me put the pip on top of the person. So she just rapid fires at a target. So I use that very much so in combat. I'm having a ton of fun with it. You mentioned the one hardware performance piece, you know, when you get around to that. I'm continuing. I'm playing it now on an RTX 4070 card at 1440p and getting, you know, like 112 frames per second ish, somewhere in there. So I'm having a great time with it. I enjoy it. Again, you know, Ubisoft and the Nickelbacking, you can say what you want to say about like people's regard for Ubisoft and the open world Assassin's Creed games. This game, as you progress Nowie's story, has some emotional drum beats that like I'm like, ooh, okay, that's digging a little bit at like kind of scratching at like the God of War like 2018 reboot kind of emotional heartstrings that it's pulling at. And I get it. I like it. You know, I don't know that we get a lot of that in those Ubisoft AC open world games.
No, I don't think we get a whole lot of family kind of dynamics or emotional play there.
Yeah. And then we also see kind of the arc of like the you know, Rocky montage and her like getting back and like becoming this level of shinobi, right? That exceeds kind of where you see her coming from. I'm not going to give this game a pass for like one of my pet peeves of hating flashbacks. But
There's plenty of them. Yeah.
yes, yeah. But I do feel like some of the flashbacks here are a little more functional in what they provide for you. So there is some get there rather than it just being strictly a story-driven flashback, you know, in the tune of like The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the flashbacks have been successful early on. They were successful for me in terms of almost tutorializing a number of different mechanics rather than having to kind of narrow path you in the world to do that. They use the flashbacks that are close by to introduce a number of different mechanics, which I think is a pretty intuitive and immersive way to do that.
I'll also say they really do an excellent job of masking, and I'll say a very good job because I didn't really even realize it till now. They do a very good job of masking the exact same mechanic that you have in Jedi Survivor of like hitting these points where you meditate, and there's kind of a little mini game to them, which I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, because what the mini game does is it obfuscates right your visual cue for some of the kind of QTE like activity as a ways of like, you know, faking the difficulty. I'm like, fine, okay, whatever. But
yeah, and I've struggled. Initially I struggled with that, but I have come to appreciate it in terms of because you are sitting down to pray, right? Like to me, I have to get it into a rhythm where I'm actually counting it out myself, but it is not simply just you have to detach yourself from the screen. You have to kind of remove yourself in a reflective space, I guess is how I feel like, okay, I get, you know, it's a, I don't know. It again feels like they're trying to do something. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to say it. Yep.
Which I think is the point of yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Again, I think they're very successful in really kind of immersing you in this world. And I see, you know, in some of those flashback memories, you know, I'm seeing where the, you know, kind of the engine and the graphical prowess of what they've been building on over the past couple of years, right? The snow physics that were in Valhalla get a play here. The movement and climbing from a variety of these games, you know, this is there's a reason this took as long as it did to come out, but it really feels like accumulation of what the last three kind of RPG aspect Assassin's Creeds, you know, it's learning from each of those and to create something very polished and really enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think through that, like the two things that I'm like not super pleased about is, as you mentioned, like the climb anywhere, how much of a backing off of the climb anywhere that there kind of is, like to the point where like you're trying to climb up mountains, and it's just not very intuitive. This may be in the game that I made the comment about a week or two ago, where I was like, it's not super intuitive how there are some mountains that you just seem to magically be able to climb, and then there are others that you can't, and there's not really like key objective tangible like visual cues that tell you whether you can or can't. And so there are some other things like in the hideout mechanic. I'm just like, I don't have time to be bothered. Just put the thing down, like wherever, just like stop keeping me from moving on to the next mission. But what I will say is, as you look about, like, this is a game that should, if people take the time to think about it, give you an appreciation for the software development lifecycle, right? And what goes, because if you look at all of the mechanics, the mini games, the metas, this game is super compartmentalized, right? In terms of when you're in like these individual discrete OODA loops and how they are separate from other gaming mechanics, and they're all in a box by their own. And the manner in which that development team had to have orchestrated and tied that all together so that it hummed and sung like an orchestra is incredibly complex, right? How to get a character to transition into those modes and out of those modes and make those things work within the isolated crucible of that thing, and then pop them out and send them on to the next thing. Again, some of that transitioning in and out, right, isn't great, doesn't always feel good while you're inside that crucible. But it all works, you know? So yeah, super interesting.
All right. It looks like you made your way back to Lost Records, Bloom.
I did, and as we'll talk about big releases coming out in the following week, it goes to mention, right, the month of April is big, and one of those reasons is because you get Lost Records Rage Tape 2 to come out in mid-April. This is a game that, man, it's tough to put a bumper sticker on this one. Well, it doesn't feel great to put a bumper sticker. Like, I am not enjoying playing it, but I am appreciating the experience that comes out of it.
I think that's I can appreciate that, because that's kind of how I was feeling with it. That's one of the reasons I kind of bounced off of it initially, was like the game itself, but I love what it's creating.
Yeah, the game to me is too much of, let me hunt and peck for the interaction points right in this scene. So I can figure out, quite frankly, how to get the hell out of it. Right. And like the number of times that I'm like, I've scanned like the entire FOV that I possibly can and found every interaction point. What is it that I'm missing? And I go back to, like you and I talked about, like the finding the video rental tape return right in the first scene, really just feels like the repetition of that over and over and over again. And what's funny is at this point, I've only been introduced to 2 of the adult versions of the cast. It's really just Autumn right now. It's only been in conversation between Autumn and Swan. So I haven't seen the other 2 adults show up yet. And so there's a little bit of, and I'm just starting now. I was also missing the Twin Peakness of it, right? I was like, I know that there's some supernatural, something that goes bump in the night aspect to this, and I'm like, this is all like a scene out of Desperate Housewives or something, right? And I'm like, I'm waiting for, and I've just gotten to that point. So it is interesting, but there's also, like I said, there's some limitations where it's like Swan's only shtick is like this camcorder thing, which also makes me reminisce about Outlast. But I'm like, but I know I'm not into the survival horror thing, right? But it's interesting. Like I said, the game mechanics and the gaminess of it, because it's not a very gamey game. But like I said, there's a scene which you kind of see a piece of in the splash screen when the game launches, and I finally got to the full 360 degree like realization of that scene from the splash screen, and it's moments like that, right? It's moments of beauty, it's moments of discovery, right, in the relationships between the characters that feels particularly rewarding. I don't feel as bad about flashbacks in this game, and there's like 60% of the game is flashbacks. But what you're doing in the flashbacks is you are building out your relationship between the characters that will be reflected in how they interact as an adult. And you can already see the impact of those. So, like I said, I'm continuing to plug through it. Like I think it will stick with me as a game that I need to constantly go back to and complete eventually. But I can also see where it will just lose its criticality in terms of like, I got to get on and like play some other things, but I'll probably always eventually come back to it.
Nice. And just to acknowledge Hero Down Under, who's also been playing it and having similar feelings and kind of impressions as you, Game Logic, in terms of where he's at, not only in the game, but also in terms of how he's enjoying it versus the story versus the mechanics. So I'm going to hit one quick one here before we head on out. I also picked up this week. It launched on the 21st. It's an early access, and it's called Splintered. I kind of stumbled across it on Steam. It is a roguelike, randomized, original Dragon Quest to some degree. It looks like Dragon Quest in terms of that kind of early 8-bit type of RPG. It has the same kind of first person window when you get into a battle screen, but it is very much in that kind of early JRPG genre in terms of you've got to be comfortable with wandering around in circles to take out lower enemies in order to level up. You're leveling up not only your character, but the equipment that you get, whether it's weapons or armor, you're also leveling those up as well. but then it has a roguelike aspect where if you die, you start back at the castle. You keep your armor, you keep your levels, but you lose money as you go. And so then you can go back to you can do a corpse run, go back and grab some of that as you are there. But once you complete there's only 2 chapters at this point, but once you complete them, then it also it has a randomizer aspect in it as well. So not only is it a roguelike, but it plays with that kind of randomized aspect, like the Legend of Zelda Link to the Past randomizer, where variety of different, you never know what's going to be in each chest, or that the enemies in one zone may not be, they're going to be randomized. And so it's by one solo developer. It's his first game. The developer it's .make Studios. It's a solo developer, Richard Mertlin, and it looks to be coming out in full release probably in 6 to 9 months. But if they're kind of trickling out some chapters here and there, it's an enjoyable little, it's a second screen game. It's great to kind of sit and grind for a little bit. On the Steam Deck is where I've been playing it. But I love the idea of kind of a roguelike JRPG and something that has some replayability to it. So, and then it was also $5. So at that point I thought, I'm going to throw $5 at this project because I just spent $3 on a cup of coffee. Why not? So, but yeah, Splintered is the game, and we'll see if I have more to say about it in 3 to 6 months as new stuff releases for it. Speaking of releases, we've got a couple releases this coming week. The first week of April, we've got Steel Hunters on PC, and the PC edition of Last of Us Part 2 is coming out as well. So, Game, any thoughts there?
Steel Hunters is one that's super weird to me. Like it's by wargaming.net. So this is the guys behind World of Tanks and World of Warships. And I'm just I know that they're going to monetize the heck out of it. I'm just, how is that going to work in a mech game? And how is that going to gain traction with the community? I don't know. But man, I'm not going to bet against wargaming.net either. And then The Last of Us Part 2 coming out for PC. Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing is 50% of the time or greater that a PlayStation game comes to PC, it comes not very well performant. And granted, they show their will and their backbone in the face of adversity, and they deploy the damage control teams and put people on it and get it shored up fairly quickly. And it turns itself around. You can watch it. You can track that in Steam user community reviews and see the turnaround. I just wish it wasn't like that so frequently. I just wish they would hey, maybe we should hold this for 30 days, right? And but maybe they're controlling costs by limiting test beds, and they're like, hey, this is just part of the hit we're going to take. But we're going to let other people find out what's broken, which is just sad. When they're asking $70 for a game. Other things I just want to throw out, we're going to cover these every single week, but other big titles coming out this month. South of Midnight coming out April 8th. Lost Records of Bloom and Rage Tape 2, as I mentioned, coming out April 15th. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle comes to PlayStation 5 on April 17th. Clair Obscur Expedition 33, April 24th. Days Gone Remastered comes to PlayStation 5 on April 25th, and Forza Horizon 5, PlayStation 5 on April 29th. So big month for Xbox, deploying its games to PlayStation. So should be fairly interesting. And again, a title that's near and dear to my heart, MotoGP 25, coming out at the end of the month.
Yeah, we got a lot of games coming this April. So plenty for us to continue talking about. And hopefully for you to continue to tune in and listen to us talk about these as well. Warwana, glad you made it in. Hope you enjoy the show as you go back to listen to it. You get a chance to hear Game Logic and I argue back and forth with each other a couple different times. So, but I hope everybody who's had a chance to listen in, whether you've been with us live on the stream or you're watching it on YouTube or on your podcatcher of choice, we are so glad to have you engaged with us and listening. We do this because we love the industry, we love games, we love the medium, and also, as Game Logic referenced, we've been doing it for long enough that it just is part of how we experience and process what we play. So glad to have you here with us and hope you enjoy with what you're seeing. We are back every week on a Sunday evening, 8 o'clock Eastern, here where we are streaming live, and glad to engage with you. Otherwise, we'll always be here with you no matter where you need us, because that's what we're here for. And hopefully that's what games are here for as well. A little bit of a reprieve in a stressful time. So until next week, this has been episode 381 for the week of March 8th. As we talked about, we'll have some Nintendo news, I'm sure, to talk about next week after the Nintendo Direct on the 2nd, but plenty of other games and plenty of other of the week's news for us to cover. Next week, it'll be Game Logic and myself, DBQ Hams, back with you again. So if you liked what you heard or you want to hear us argue some more, come on back, because I bet we're going to have some more to talk about. But until next week.
I want you to get out of here with a clean intro so you have the last word. But just before you do, in addition to the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct on the 2nd, there's also a why am I brain dumping it now?
Oh, you interrupt my segue and then you forget?
There's more Doom the Dark Ages gameplay, as far as I understand it, video coming out tomorrow as well.
Yes, because I think those people have been at events, but the embargo opens up this week here. Yep. So, and that'll be fun to see as well, because I'm really enjoying what I'm seeing out of Doom the Dark Ages. All right, everybody. Thanks, Game Logic, for that additional point of fact. So until next week, play the games you love those you play with, and be kind to yourself. Good night, everybody.